Hey everybody, welcome back to Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. My name's Kiley, again sitting in for Shane. Again, joining me is John Mobley, one of our firm's senior head injury attorneys. So we're going to revisit our discussion where we left off in talking about traumatic brain injury. And so John, why don't you talk about, we're kind of through the emergency phase, the client is stable, we're getting into the rehab phase now, the long haul. Talk about that.
For a lot of people that sustain brain injuries, this is the longer portion of the, in terms of the timeline of your total treatment of care, because it can last for as short as a couple days to get you out of the hospital to essentially a lifetime of care. But for the immediate, when you're in the hospital and in recovering, you know, it can usually be a few days to a couple weeks if it's some more serious level care.
How about, let's talk about, you know, once we're out of that rehabilitation phase, maybe we're at home now, we're trying to get back in the community, maybe back at work, whatever that may be. Talk about what that might look like to our clients.
Absolutely. So that transition to going home in what's now the new normal for the client is a hard transition for a lot of people, especially depending on the severity of your brain injury, because what used to be, you know, normal to you is now either not normal or increasingly difficult to do day-to-day tasks at home, completing stuff that used to be able to complete no problem. Now you either need the assistance of family, spouses, and your support structure to lean on, or in some cases you need true at-home care. So, you know, just going back to kind of some of the purposes of this podcast and what we're trying to accomplish here, which is provide information to, you know, the family and friends of the people that have the brain injury. You know, just be aware that setbacks are bound to happen, right? Your loved one may be on a path to what's seemingly getting better and then either stall out, or maybe they can no longer do one of the things they accomplished or goals and can no longer do that anymore. It's a pretty normal part of the process. It can be frustrating to some, and so patience is a virtue with a lot of TBI related care. Being patient with the new person that your loved one has become, because they may not be the same person. That is one of the stark realities of these types of injuries, that you may need to set new expectations for a loved one. You may need to lower the bar on a certain level of things and know that they just may not have the same skill set as the person that you once knew before the accident. That's a huge shift in understanding, and it really redefines your relationship with the person when you think about it, because you now need to, you know, maybe give more grace and you know, a wider margin of error for these people, so that, because they're doing their best to get by and they're doing their best to get better, and sometimes they don't even understand the severity of the head injury they have. So it's definitely a very, you know, long and arduous process. And, you know, the sooner that support systems can understand this, and your family and friends and spouse, the better the outcome, really. And truly, we do mean that, because, you know, if you have expectations for this person to behave exactly like they did before the accident, it's going to create some very frustrating situations. Because their brain may not be able to be operating on the same level that it once was.
So yeah, you talked a lot about, you know, the relationship, the personality, that sort of thing, you know, those higher level executive functions being affected. You also talked a lot about, you know, the brain controls everything, you know, our physical processes too. So when we go back home, you know, how does that look? Where we maybe have some physical issues to deal with, slower moving, maybe our balance is off. Is there anything we might need to prepare for going home for those sorts of things?
Absolutely. So especially with some of the cognition things and the physical deficits and impairments that we talked about, we do see sometimes where clients have to really change and manipulate their home around them. A, to make it a safe environment to even live in.
Right.
B, to you know, prevent them from, you know, having a more difficult time than they should have. These are good things for occupational therapists to make suggestions on. Sometimes when you can't change your body to be able to do something, you have to change things around you. Occupational therapists can help assist with maybe if your arm can't reach up to your hand, you need to brush your teeth, you have some sort of extension tool. And these may seem silly, but it's necessary for some folks. In the context of a brain injury, that may involve building a safer stairway in and out of the house. If stairs become an issue, like let's say you have balance and vertigo issues and dizziness, maybe if you have 10 steps leading up to your front door, that might not be the safest thing to navigate every day, because all of a sudden that becomes an Ironman triathlon for someone. It's not just walking up the steps, it's a matter of life and death. So you got to kind of change your house. It can be installing support bars in the bathroom, support bars in the shower if you are deemed a high fall risk. Maybe you don't buy things with sharp corners anymore. You take the Steve Jobs approach to rounded edges, because that could be the difference between bumping your head in a life-threatening situation if you have a fall. Also just kind of choosing how you develop and build your house from that point on when you have these types of injuries. Maybe if you have memory issues, you don't cook in the kitchen anymore, because if you don't remember to turn the gas stove off, you might have a fire hazard issue. And this is something that a lot of people have to do when they have brain injuries. Their house becomes cluttered with Post-it notes and reminders, and things that were once, like I mentioned, just the gas stove. It's such an easy example, but it's easy for most of us when we're totally with it to remember to turn that off. But if you never remember, then and it's always a fire hazard, maybe you don't spend time in the kitchen anymore. So, these are things that you do. And also, really interfacing with your treating specialist, your neurologist, and your, any at-home assistance that you may have really will help you navigate that process better than anyone else can, because they deal with this type of stuff on a day in, day out basis. So they can make recommendations for your symptoms and then what you have going on. From a support system standpoint, like the spouse and the family and friends and the people that are impacted by the victim who has the brain injury, it's important for you to see what sort of things your loved one is struggling with. And remembering maybe if you accompany them to the doctor visit, which is very common, because people with brain injuries aren't their best historians, right? They have trouble reporting exactly what's going on and the difficulties they have. So it's always great to have a loved one maybe go to those appointments with you, and then when you're at home and you're having issue with certain things due to your new brain injury symptoms, they can report to the specialist and be like, look, I've been noticing this, and this at home. He gets frustrated. He can't tie his shoes anymore. What can we do? And then when you report to the specialist, they can then make good medical specialist recommendations. But they don't know what they don't know. So if the issue and the problem never makes word back to them, then they don't know how to help. The specialist does, I mean. So that's why that's another area where family and loved ones can really shine and really get in there and improve overall outcomes and just general quality of life.
That's some great information. I think, you said something I really kind of try to take to heart often is you don't know what you don't know, right? So you've got to reach out to those around you. Your medical team's a great resource, but I'm sure they can plug you into other support groups, that sort of thing. I'm sure there's a lot of, they've been through it, right? They've walked down that path so far. Maybe they've got pointers or even emotional support, something like that, right? I'm sure that's helpful.
Absolutely. And that's really a huge area. And possibly, after everything we addressed here, Kiley, one of the most important things long-term for these family members and spouses who have a loved one with a brain injury is it's going to be too much for you to put the weight of everything on your shoulders. So one of the big things we recommend in speaking sometimes with extended family is you want to find a support group sooner rather than later of like-minded and similarly situated people that are going through the same thing. And some of these people in these support groups may have been dealing with this for decades and decades, so they've seen it all. So, no need to reinvent the wheel here. Lean on support groups to help you get through this type of stuff, or to get new ideas for how to make your loved ones with the brain injuries life easier. That is priority typically number one. It also acts as a good outlet too, because you think about it, if it's just a husband and wife at home and maybe the husband has a brain injury and isn't the same person anymore, you can be not alone in your house, but certainly feel alone in your house because you don't necessarily have that sounding board of that loved one and that spouse that you used to have anymore. So by virtue of reaching out to a support group, you can then kind of interface, let off some of that steam, get ideas, talk about it. It almost acts as group therapy.
Absolutely.
In addition to just the day-to-day great ideas that those support groups can provide. So I really can't stress it enough to anyone watching this podcast. You know, if you are going through this, that should be one of your top priorities is reaching out and finding those support groups.
We're kind of getting to a tricky area now. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the legal and the financial aspects of an injury like this.
As the caregiver now for someone who may be impacted with a brain injury, obviously a lot of these things we've been discussing, they're not free. They cost money, more money than pretty much anyone, you know, the majority of Americans have. So what does that mean realistically for you? It means that you're probably going to need to immediately start certain processes of getting support, whether that is in the form of making sure you identified any short-term, long-term disability your loved one may have had through work, any sort of, which if you don't have those policies, you should work on potentially getting them because you are, a lot of people get life insurance, but you are much more likely to become disabled than you are to die. Well, everyone's at a certain point is going to die, but you know, a lot of the people who do term life insurance and disability insurance say you're actually more likely to become disabled. So it's important insurance to have, but never more so than in the context of a brain injury, because you cannot do your job to the same degree. You just can't when you have a brain injury with a lot of symptoms. So we also recommend, if the brain injury is bad enough where you're truly impaired, reaching out to disability attorneys who can help navigate the process. And we refer our clients to disability attorneys pretty consistently because it's a great way. If your doctors have said that you're completely impaired, you can begin that process, and it's a very long process. Sometimes I think it's on average about 2 years. It's a very long process to get approved. And you know, certainly a disability expert or a disability attorney can guide you through that process more. We typically refer those out for review. Now, that's so important with those because, you know, obviously if you are then deemed disabled through that process, then you can, you know, get certain benefits. It can cover a lot of your cost, a lot of your therapy cost, any sort of additional special medical transport and housing potentially, if you need to be in like a full care facility, you know, because we haven't even really talked about that, but in the most extreme cases of head injuries, your loved one may not be fit to take care of you at home. You may need a nurse or a medical professional to be the one doing this care because you just may not be fit for it. I mean, if you think if your spouse is significantly larger than you or something like that and requires lifting, are you going to be able to do that at home? Do you need a medical assistant to do that and to do it safely? Right. You know, so these are things that really come up on the day-to-day logistics that really have to be considered. And there are definitely resources out there. But like I said, getting started sooner on them rather than later is really the name of the game before you really start to feel the burn of that financial stress and the fact that maybe you had 2 incomes coming in and now you have 1. Or maybe you have 1 income, but it's been greatly reduced because that person can't work or be as a top performer like they were anymore. You know, so those are the things that are going to start to burn after a very short period of time. So the sooner you can get some of these support structures and financial assistance programs to kick in, the better, without a doubt. It's also great in terms of covering a lot of your medical care as well. In terms of some of the other financial considerations, we obviously stress to anyone that has been a victim of any sort of negligence, like a fall, slip and fall, you know, assault, or a motor vehicle crash, to reach out sooner rather than later. And the reason is because, you know, this stuff ages, unfortunately, all evidence ages like vinegar versus wine, and that stuff gets stale, videos get deleted, evidence gets spoiled, and so really the sooner that we can get in there and preserve this stuff, the better chance you're going to have for a good outcome on your case. If anything, and we don't charge for consults, so we always tell clients it doesn't hurt to just reach out and get an analysis of your case, please, just to get a rundown. You may decide that you want to try and navigate this through your own, but I think after everything we've talked about today, it's a lot. You may have bigger fish to fry in that person's life, so to speak. And what I mean is that you maybe focus on getting to appointments and doing all these other things, not also in the middle of learning how to become a caregiver on the fly, doing all these other things on the fly, becoming now the main breadwinner. You're also going to, try and become, a lawyer. So we say, please just reach out. Let us analyze the case. Let us take a look at things. And, we've done so many of these that we can help supercharge the process, make sure we're not missing any deadlines, also maybe guide you in a more appropriate direction so that you can better help your loved one with a brain injury. Certainly some of these cases are, in a lot of brain injury cases, are some of the worst injuries that can occur out there in negligence cases. So it always seems to warrant an attorney to review, so you have a full idea of where all the money may be hiding, how to find more money, identifying all the correct policies, doing things like asset searches on the defendant. They may say they don't have two pennies to rub together, and then we find out later on they did indeed have plenty of assets to go after. So there actually are forms of recovery, or maybe there are hidden insurance policies. With cases like these, and just how much pain and suffering and medical bills and other things are involved, the name of the game is finding any and all monies and recoveries, right? Because that's really what it takes to get full and fair justice for people with these types of injuries. And that's, we really believe in that here.
Yeah, I'm sure that the offending party, the violator, however you want to term it, has likely secured their own legal counsel, and you're going to have all that coming at you, trying to talk you into doing this, that, and the other. That probably isn't in your best interest. So having somebody like you with the firm here to champion that and make sure those sorts of things aren't happening too is going to be a great idea. I mean, kind of a no-brainer, it seems like.
Absolutely, and you will sometimes see that where insurance companies will be reaching out. The defendant's insurance company will be immediately reaching out. And we do not advise potential clients or clients to speak to the insurance companies for a whole litany of reasons that we'll save for another day on another podcast.
Right. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. Again, this has been John Mobley giving us some sage advice. We hope you enjoyed, and please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. And as always, remember, if you're in pain, call Shane at 980-999-9999.
In pain, so I call Shane. 980-999-9999. In pain, call Shane.